Hi, and welcome to Answers News for April the 6th, 2020. And I'm joined by Ken Ham, and this is Tim Chafee, who works doing a lot of the content for our attractions for both the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum. I don't know what your official title is.
Content manager for the
Okay,
attractions
so,
division.
all right.
Yep.
I was going to guess that. But
And we are distancing ourselves from each other.
6 feet.
6 feet? So it's more than 6.
Close.
Tim's more, yeah, but
He's over 6 feet tall.
yeah, he is. He's like 10
It probably
feet
looks
tall.
like I'm right there because I'm so much taller than you
Don't
guys.
forget, I call him Nefeltim. That's what I call him. So,
Oh, my goodness.
just as people are getting online here, and I'll be following on my Facebook, and Georgia, you will follow Answers in Genesis, and Tim's going to follow on YouTube. And as we get online here, we are doing a number of live programs every day now while the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter are closed to the public. And those live programs are 10, 12, 3, and 7. The one at 10 is a science experiment for kids, and they are very popular.
They are fun.
And then the 3 o'clock one has to do with animal encounters. And 7 o'clock tonight, I'm doing a presentation. It's a 30-minute talk on should we lose sleep over the coronavirus.
It's very, very good.
So it's 7 o'clock
very
tonight. And then our Easter event. So we had to cancel our Easter conference. So we decided, let's go ahead and provide a special series of programs for everybody. And so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 p.m. each day is a special Easter program for kids. Brian Osborne is doing those. And so we have a number of other talks and
All
devotions.
of us will be presenting at some point during the
I do a
weekend.
devotion for Friday morning, and then I'll be having Ray Comfort on for a devotion on Sunday morning, because he was one of the ones coming out here to our conference. But the best way to find out all the details is go to answerseaster.org. We set that up for this. Answers Easter. Answerseaster.org. I see people getting online from Albuquerque and Fort Worth, Texas, and Oregon, and a lot of people are online right now. So over to you, Dr. Param.
All right. So I cannot, you have to read this article. Like, you really do. I cannot stop laughing with this article. Astrophysicist gets magnets stuck up nose while inventing coronavirus device. Okay, so a little coronavirus humor here. So this is an Australian.
See, I knew that's why you put it in there.
It could only happen in Australia.
If she can throw off at an Australian, she will laugh at an Australian.
Okay, I laugh at one all the time. So anyways, this is an Australian astrophysicist who was bored, okay, right, in his apartment or whatever. And so he decided he would try to invent a device that basically would send off an alarm when you touched your face, because you're not supposed to touch your face because you'll transmit the virus to yourself. And so, okay.
You came close.
All right. So anyway, so he had these really strong neodymium magnets. Okay, so they're very strong. If you've ever had some of the hematite ones or whatever, they're extremely strong. So he ended up just kind of playing around with them, and he stuck 2 up his nose and 2 on the outside of his nose. All right. And he actually ended up inventing a circuit that did the opposite of what he wanted. So instead of it sending off alarm when you touched your face, it sent off alarm unless you touched it. It would send off alarm everywhere else, basically. So you had to touch your face to shut the alarm off. But that was only part.
That was just the beginning.
So why don't you can...
Well, then he couldn't get them apart because they were so strong.
Right.
Well, what he did, he pulled the outside ones off, which caused the 2 on the inside to stick together. And then he couldn't figure out how to get those off because they were so strong. And he looked online to figure out how do you get these off. And he saw that some kids have had the same problem. A lot of boys have had the same problem with those magnetic toys and everything. So he thought, well, put 2 more in there and that'll lock them together and you can pull them up. But those got stuck. And then he tried something else.
He tried some pliers, but it magnetized the pliers.
So they got stuck as well.
It's just like a comedy of errors. Like, you just read this whole thing. It's like one thing after another. So finally, the guy he lives with or something like that took him to a hospital, and they had to put him to sleep and remove the magnets from his nose.
Yeah, well, it was his girlfriend. They said she took him to where she works at the hospital because she wanted all her colleagues to laugh at him.
So basically, he wanted to get the magnets down under, but they were up over instead.
Yeah, something like that. So this just shows that Australian astrophysicists...
You had your little laugh now at an Australian? Did you enjoy that? Did you enjoy that? Okay, all right, let's go on the next one.
Anyway, so that's
Ken, why didn't you like that one?
All right, coronavirus-themed foods aim to raise a smile during the crisis. So this is just a few of the different places that have done this. And again, I think it's really funny. There's lots of seriousness with this, but at the same time, we need to sleep, as you're going to be talking about tonight. We need to laugh a little bit to lighten it up. So this is from Vietnam, and so this is a special bun that is shaped like the coronavirus virus. And this is a special, like, chocolate egg of some kind, I think, that's made to look like it. And then, of course, you have to have your toilet paper cake, right? Because everyone's making a run on toilet paper. No pun intended. And then you have cookies with face masks, and one more, I think, with Dr. Fauci, I think is how you pronounce his last name. So he's been advising on the coronavirus and seen him in a lot of press conferences.
I found one too.
You found one too? What did you find?
And particularly because of Easter weekend and Easter bunnies.
The Easter bunny has a face mask this year, so got to embrace that. So I did have to laugh, though, with this article. In Vietnam, where the coronavirus burger, the bun was, it says they have a joke that if you're scared of something, you should eat it, which is a little bit concerning. I don't think people should take that literally, because then I'd be eating spiders, and that would be bad. So
yeah, we talk about facing your fears, but that's a little bit different than what we mean.
Yeah. So
okay, well, let's get on to something that,
more serious.
Evolutionists have done it. They proved that fish walked on land.
Supposedly.
Because they found a fish similar to fish we found before that have similar bones to what we found in the similar fish before.
Yep.
And go on.
Yeah. So this ancient fish represents the earliest known evolutionary evidence of fingers. All right. So supposedly this is a fish from 380 million years ago that when they looked at its fins, they noticed that the bones in those fins were very similar to bones that we have in our hands. And so the idea was that this must be the first evidence of that, evolutionary ancestor to basically us and to land animals that supposedly evolved from those that crawled out of the water. And so...
Although the number of bones doesn't fit.
No.
They said the number of bones is not the same.
Nope.
But it's a lobe-finned fish.
Correct.
And coelacanth. Remember they thought the coelacanth had become extinct 65 million years ago, and they found them been catching off the coast of Indonesia for years and eating them. And a lobe-finned fish does have bones embedded in the muscle in fins, and it can act like a little helicopter in the water and so on. There's a lungfish, which is another lobe-finned fish, and they can even use their fins to push across the floor. What about a mud skipper? A mud skipper can walk on the floor, so to speak, but they're designed to do what they do.
Yeah.
And they're fully functional, and it's just another lobe-finned fish. In fact, another one is Tiktaalik. And we have an article on our website about Tiktaalik, just showing it's a lobe-finned fish, and they said it was one of these transitional forms, but they're not. And I know Dr. Gabriella Haynes, who's our paleontologist, she had a lot to say about this, and she said even some of those bones, there's even some question about whether they're really finding what's there or not, because there's a lot of interpretation of what they see, and it's not as clear as what they're saying.
And I think too, it goes back to the fact too that, depends on how you look at this, right? So they would look at the bones and say, well, they're similar, so there must be a common ancestor. We would look at the bones and say, if they truly are similar, which they may or may not be, but if they truly are similar, then they have the same designer. Right? I mean... Because
it's a feature that works well.
A common designer, yeah. I mean, we have similar bone structure to other vertebrates, right?
We
do. Of course, evolutionists will say we're all related to them, but...
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's all about, a worldview and how you interpret the evidence in light of that worldview.
Do you realize evolutionists, if they're truly consistent, would have to say we're related to the coronavirus? What do you think?
Probably. Yeah, but viruses are technically alive.
Because we all go back to some primeval soup millions of years ago.
Yeah, if the genetic material that was there that eventually gave rise to everything, including the coronavirus. So, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to go back that far. All right. One of Darwin's evolution theories finally proved by Cambridge researchers. So when you read this title, you think, oh my goodness, this is why you have to really read carefully, and you have to make sure you're defining your terms, right? Because the first sentence says, scientists have proved one of Charles Darwin's theories of evolution for the first time. So you're expecting some kind of earth-shattering information, but that's not what you find.
Well, I read it, and now tell me if I read this and I was looking for this earth-shattering information, and what she said was that you can get different species forming in a group, and they can even form different subspecies, which is what Dr. Nathaniel Jensen talks about in his Replacing Darwin book.
Yep.
So in other words, what she said she proved was what we have seen happen and what we've observed and what we've always said.
And what we've been teaching here for a long time. We teach it at the Ark and the animal kinds
So
exhibit.
within a kind, you can get different species.
Yeah.
And you can even get subspecies.
Yeah, that are probably on their way to becoming species.
A different species.
Yeah.
Within a kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that proves evolution.
That proves evolution. But again, what happens in a lot of the school system, for instance, public schools, kids are told when you see speciation, they're told that's evolution. But it's not evolution in the molecules to man sense at all. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just change within a kind because of the genetic information already there.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and they talked about that if creatures have a natural barrier that they can't continue to interbreed, then you're going to see the changes take place, which is what we've been saying all along.
Somebody here made a very profound statement about the last article we had about the lobe-finned fish. They said fish have always been fish.
Yeah, it's still
very profound.
Yeah, and that's the thing with this article. Every time she says evolution, or every time they say evolution, I could just replace it with speciation, and it would be truthful. What being talked about in reality, not evolution. And that's why it's so important. This is a good exercise to do with your kids, is help them understand. You really have to define the terms. You have to know what you're talking about, and really be careful of that, because the headline looks very sensational, but it should. One of the things I said when I first read that first line, scientists have proved. Proved is not a word you use in science very much. Because if you prove something, it means that it's basically going to become a law. And there's not too many things in science, especially biology, that become laws. So it's very problematic.
But again, it just shows you, we're just seeing the same old stuff regurgitated in different ways. Speciation means evolution's true. And that's basically what they're saying. And we've been showing people speciation only occurs within a kind, within the created genetic variability that God put there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And they just keep regurgitating the same old stuff, but just saying it in different ways.
And
go ahead.
This one, it says it's by the University of Cambridge. They don't really say the name of the writer, but what you're talking about discerning what you're reading, especially when it comes from science writers or popularizers, not the scientists themselves necessarily, because they'll write things that are a little more careful in their journals, but then the science writers will always use these,
They want you to read it. So.
Finally found the missing layer. It's all these sensational claims, and then they're not really backed up by what you read.
Right. Hey, I got a shout out to Carrie here. She says, praying you all stay well. Answers News is one thing that hasn't changed for me through all of this. I'm grateful for you. And so, yes, we like to keep providing that so you have some normal things in your life.
So we have people watching from all over Alabama and Missouri and all over the place.
Yeah, we've got Ireland and Scotland and South Africa.
This next item was incredible because I read it and thought, so humans have eaten plants and meats.
Yep.
That's incredible.
That's earth-shattering.
It is. So
this is like, this Answers News. We should have called it something like, duh. Like, of course.
Because I was on it.
Not because we're dumb, but
there are fish that have bones in their fins. Oh.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right. How Stone Age humans unlock the glucose in plants. So this is, again, goes along the lines of they always thought we were hunter-gatherers, so they only knew how to eat meat. They didn't have the intelligence.
We came down out of the trees and then hunted animals, right?
Right, yeah. And so, but now the more that they look at this, the more they're finding evidence that they boiled plants, they ate plants, and they can tell that by the tartar, so to speak, that's on the
this
teeth.
is sort of what they would call ancient man.
Right,
We would say people that lived after the flood.
Right.
And some of the first generations after the flood.
Right, because Neanderthals are fully human. Like, there's no doubt about that. There's plenty of archaeological evidence that indicates that.
And they made tools. And look, they make
jewelry.
They make instruments here to grind up plants to make flour, to make bread.
Shocking.
And one thing they pointed out in the article, which I think is helpful, is the bones are often preserved from animals, and that's why we see evidence that they ate the animals. But a lot of times the plant remains aren't around at all, so they just assume, well, this is what we find, therefore this must be how it was. But what aren't we finding that tells more of the story? And in this case, Ken, what you just brought up, they find these grinding stones that showed they were making flour. Yeah,
they're finding evidence now that early humans, we would say what they're referring to as early humans are the ones that lived, as I said, after the flood. You know, first generations after the flood. But what they're really saying is, guess what we found?
Yeah.
Humans have eaten meat and vegetables.
Yeah.
Wow.
And bread.
Yep.
And bread.
And
carbs,
I
forgot the bread.
So that's the thing. So one of the things I cracked up when I read this article, because it's like, oh, that paleo diet. Okay, the first time I ever heard of paleo diet, I thought, okay, this is a problem.
Now you realize there's probably somebody going to get on here and really complain if you say something negative.
I don't care. Say what you want, but
okay.
They said that the paleo diet, when I first saw it, I thought it's based on evolutionary assumptions that we were hunter-gatherers, right? So you should eat lots of meat and lots of vegetables, but not really much in the way of like carbs, okay? Because carbs are bad, right? And what this article is saying, oh, that paleo diet, well, it turns out the people that lived during the Paleolithic era, they ate their carbs too. They had flour, they ate bread, they had a balanced diet.
So the paleo diet is extinct?
Yes, it should be.
But what we talked about is if you're talking about during the Ice Age or at certain times in history, there may not be a whole lot of plants available to you. Maybe some, but you know, it just depends on what's around you, where you live, and what your climate is like at that point.
And, by the way, I think it's important for people to understand. I've seen a number of other diets too, and as you're reading it and the person promoting it says, you know, now our evolutionary history, this happened,
you see it a lot.
And so they're based on evolutionary ideas. You know, I base my diet on Genesis 9:3. After the flood, God said we could eat all things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Especially meat, he mentioned there, so I like that one.
Yeah, you can eat everything.
That's your definition of a hot dog, right?
But not bats.
No.
And it says, I love this quote in here. It says, a lot of paleo diets talk about health, but by this they mean weight loss. And I can't think of a single human ancestor who wanted to lose weight. They weren't overweight, so they weren't caring about. And I'm not saying you know, it's just good to have a balanced diet. You shouldn't excuse something just because people have said it's bad, so to speak. So.
Well, Ken, we've got hello all from Australia. So I don't know if they tuned in after the first article. If they did, they might want to go back and check
somebody here
out.
says hi from Quarantine Central at New York City.
Oh.
Yep.
Isn't it great that even though people are quarantined in certain areas and all that, we can still reach into all their homes.
Yep.
We can visit them.
It's amazing.
How about that?
It's
it is amazing.
Yep. Okay, and this next one, coronavirus. Home abortions approved during outbreak. So probably you've seen this here in the U.S., whether they went kind of back and forth, and it depends on the state that you're in, whether they're still allowing abortions. But this is actually focusing on England, and it said that they were worried that women who want an abortion but have underlying health conditions would, you know, put themselves at risk for these procedures or turn to dangerous alternative if they weren't given some way to abort their children. And so in England, what they're doing is they are allowing chemical abortions up to 10 weeks. So this is where they take a series of pills that actually aborts the child.
And it's very horrific on the mother's body.
Which they've allowed that in clinics before, but now you can take the pills at home. And this one, the article says for a woman who need an abortion up to 10 weeks. And
as you read through this article, you're reading about many different countries. You know, it could even be Northern Ireland or Wales or England or, you know, lots of different countries that are doing whatever they can to help women kill their children, to put to death the children in their womb. You know, it's interesting too, there was an article just this week, or last week I should say, Planned Parenthood was pleading for protective gear for their workers so they wouldn't get the coronavirus and die, so that they can continue putting to death children.
Yeah.
And think about the abortion issue. In America alone, about 2,500 children are put to death every day.
Yeah. Way more than what the
and
coronavirus
yet, if
is
one
doing.
person dies from a coronavirus, it gets news headlines.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that includes the ones from the morning after pill and those other things.
No, there's probably a lot of others that doesn't include.
Yeah. And if you want to watch and this is, a movie about abortion, and it even talks about chemical abortion in here. Unplanned is a great movie for that. It's one of those things. It's hard to say it's a great movie, because it is very challenging, and encourage parents to watch it before you show it to your younger children in the home. But it shows what a woman goes through when she has a chemical abortion. And it was I mean, obviously I had never seen that before, but it was just shocking to think about. Not only does it kill the child, but the effects that it has on the woman is horrific. And so anyways, it's just the fact that and I said throughout this whole article, one of the things they kept saying was they kept changing their terminology. They would say women who need an abortion. Then they would say for those wanting an abortion, so which is it? Is it a need or is it a want? Because, and they talk about pregnancy. They don't talk about them aborting the child.
They talk about interrupting a pregnancy.
Interrupting the pregnancy.
And they use terms like healthcare and reproductive healthcare. Yeah. And they avoid everything except the reality is they're putting to death a child. Yes. If you think about it, child sacrifice is a worldwide cult. I mean, God's not going to stand by and just let that go. Yeah. And in some ways, I wonder whether, he obviously is allowing what's happening with this coronavirus scare that people are under and the panic and all the things that are happening out there. But I think God is allowing all that to happen to try to wake people up.
Yeah, this article it's heartbreaking, and it's very disturbing as well. Yeah. We're working on the Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit, and you guys have seen some previews of that. And we've got ultrasounds, some of these brand new 4D ultrasounds. We have one of a baby that's only 7 weeks along, which, according to this, in England, they could take a couple of pills and kill that baby, and you can see the baby forming, you can see the movement. It's really heartbreaking, but I can't wait for people to see that exhibit and then be able to see what's really going on in the womb.
I should mention to people, in July, we will be opening this new exhibit at the Creation Museum, which is a Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit. It's a Sanctity of Life exhibit. This is phase 1, but I've seen it, and I actually did a behind-the-scenes Facebook Live on it. It is powerful.
It is.
It is incredibly powerful, because we look at it from a biblical and scientific perspective. Right. We look at it from both and help people understand in reality what's going on. But there's no doubt, abortion is the murder of children. We shouldn't call it pro-choice. We should call it
pro-murder.
Pro-murder.
Yep. All right, this next one kind of goes in line with that one. Argentinian doctor sentenced to prison for refusing to terminate pregnancy. So in the country of Argentina now, this medical doctor, who's a gynecologist, is being held criminally culpable for refusing to terminate a pregnancy, also known as murder a child, but that's how they're putting it. But basically, it was a child or a woman who was raped in 2017, and she wanted to have an abortion, and the doctor said no. And praise God, that child was actually born and was put up for adoption and was adopted. And so another family got to take that child in and love that child. But it's just sad when you think that they even want to go against a person's conscience to refuse to do this and say, if you do this, you're gonna go to prison for that if you don't do it.
So tell me if I'm wrong in my understanding of things here, the way I see it. People can comment too, and that is, okay, so the doctor was put in trial because he didn't kill this child in the womb.
Correct.
So he was put in trial for that. Then the child was born. So why don't they sentence the child to death? Because the doctor should have put to death that child.
Yeah. It's inconsistent is the problem. It's okay if it's in the womb, but not if it's out of the womb. But what's the difference? Just the location.
Well, as I said, at the point of fertilization, you have a unique combination of information, the DNA from mother and father. It's not the mother's body. It's a unique combination of information. You are uniquely you at the point of fertilization, made in God's image. So abortion is killing a human being, because when you start from God's word, we have that foundation. We're made in God's image. Of course, when you have generations of kids that have been taught man's just an animal and there's no God, so what you're aborting is just an animal, it's not human, there's nothing special, and so why shouldn't you do whatever you want to do and get rid of it if you want?
And when you read through the quotes in this article, it really does bring to light this two different worldview ideas, because when we look at this issue, we look at this is a human being made in the image of God. therefore this is top priority, the life of the mother and the life of the baby. And when you read through this, it says, quote, ignoring a woman's voice, ignoring her vital needs, subjugating reproductive rights, devastating the psyche, and enslaving the body in order to force pregnancy after a rape means denying the victim status as a subject of rights and is the incarnation of gender violence in its most painful form. What if this is a little girl that was being born that was growing in the womb? It's okay to kill that little girl? Right. Is that gender violence?
They don't talk about the baby's rights. It's all about the woman's rights.
And Georgia, one of the things, and if you want to answer this, but when they talk about rape, incest, and so on, people say, but, in those circumstances, but that's not even the point. As sad as that is, and as horrific as that is, at fertilization, if you are 100% a human individual, what right does anyone have to kill that human individual?
It's still a human being, regardless of how the child was conceived. The child is made in the image of God, and the child has a right to life because of that. That child is valuable. And yeah, there are some terrible situations, but like this child was put up for adoption. There are plenty of parents out there who would love to have that child in their home, and that's perfectly fine to be able to do that. But there are a lot of, and I know we'll talk about that some in the Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit too. I got to comment on that as well as others, and because we adopted a child, and so it's so important to understand those types of alternatives.
Well, and you don't punish the child for something that the child didn't do, and it's very disturbing when you read through these things. But you don't use an extreme situation to therefore justify abortion at any time and any place, which is what people will do.
See, I think a lot of abortion is because it comes down to people are selfish. They want to do what they want to do with sex. They don't want to obey God's rules in regard to marriage. And they want to decide what they want for their life, selfishness and regardless of anything else. And they want to be free to do whatever they want to do. I think that's what it's all about. It's man justifying, I am God, I can do what I want with sex, I can do what I want in any way I want, and I should have a right to do that. And if a baby's conceived as a result of it, then I'll just put them to death.
Yeah. Somebody said instead of the Hippocratic Oath, it should be the Hypocritic Oath. But this doctor, though, like I said, stood up for that. I mean, I'm thankful for this doctor standing up for his rights and for his wanting to hold to the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm. And I think more and more we're going to have to see that where doctors really are going to have to take a stand on this.
I like the last paragraph here. It points out another inconsistency. And here's the telling twist of the story. A few years ago, a different Argentinian court granted an orangutan a writ of habeas corpus to be released from a zoo. So an ape was declared a wrongfully imprisoned person, while a doctor was declared a criminal for refusing to take innocent human life.
Yeah, it's just so.
But that's
such a paradox.
That's a messed up world. Who, once you abandon God's word, anything goes, and you can define anything the way you want, and you decide for yourself what's right and what's wrong, regardless of how illogical and inconsistent it is.
So he's facing 14 months in jail, and then 28 months after that, where he's not allowed to run for office or anything like that.
Yeah. All right, New York City mayor threatens to close churches permanently for meeting during the coronavirus. So this has to do with New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who basically said, so many states have said, they don't want churches to meet because of this and being in close proximity to each other. But that's not what we're commenting on. We're commenting on the fact that he said that if you continue to meet, in spite of the order that says not to meet, that he's going to close down the church permanently.
See, when a mayor of a city has that sort of power, what does that tell you about what could happen in the future? You could see what's happened in China. Communist China and Cuba, where they say, we're just closing down all those churches. We consider them detrimental to our health or whatever it is, or they can say they're spiritually damaging to people, so we'll close them down, and then they can't. You realize it's a warning that if you have a person with the wrong worldview who gets into power in America, think of what they could do. They could declare Christianity as some sort of pandemic or something, and close down all the churches. Look, they closed down all the local churches, their buildings, not the church themselves, which is the body of Christ, but they closed down the buildings basically overnight. If they can do that in a situation like this, you think of the wrong person in power who has a very anti-God worldview and had enough people in politics of the younger generation who are like that with them, you think of what they could do.
Yeah.
Well, you've even got New York right now with Samaritan's Purse, Franklin Graham's organization, building this hospital basically in Central Park. And then you have a bunch of activist groups who are trying to shut it down just because of their particular stance on marriage.
I saw that.
And so don't help people, don't save lives just because we don't agree with your position on something.
Yeah, and he can't actually do that. I mean, a mayor of a city cannot legally and constitutionally close churches permanently, at least not right now. So what he's saying is unconstitutional. And I know you were quoted as speaking to this too, that he legally can't do this. But it's important during, I think, this time that all of this is happening, which most of us have never seen anything like this before, that we really watch that our rights aren't taken away during this time.
The very fact that he threatened that and even said it is a warning shot for this nation.
Exactly. So, we're going to have to be really careful.
So do we have time to talk about Tim's ancestor?
We do.
Okay, this is a really
This is
great
a stunning article. Are you ready? All right. This worm-like creature is the first ancestor on the human and animal family tree. Okay, so you can see that bump right there in the red image. That is our ancestor.
And how big is that?
It's a rice.
The size of a grain of rice.
It's the size of a grain of rice.
Yep.
It has a mouth.
And Ken, where was it found?
And
where was it found?
Australia.
South Australia. So how is it my ancestor? I'm really big and I'm not from Australia. You're smaller than me and you're from Australia.
It's another Australian news article. And look, they found it's a worm.
Yeah, and they said it has bilateral symmetry, so it's the same on both sides. They said it has a mouth and an anus. They believe they see these hole-like structures that supposedly indicate
And therefore they said that's obviously our ancestor.
That's the earliest common ancestor of all.
The earliest common ancestor is a worm.
555 million years ago in the Ediacaran period.
When I look at that, I immediately thought, man, that could be the ancestor to humans.
Could be the ancestor of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably doesn't have hair.
So, no, it didn't have hair. It's probably maybe more closely. I tell you what, no wonder the Bible says, professing to be wise, they become fools.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even understand how they look at something like this. I mean, I know I'm not an expert in this area, don't get me wrong, but to look at that and think, oh yeah, that's where we all came from, because you have to have something that has bilateral symmetry. Bacteria don't, so you got to have that first creature, so to speak, that does that. And so they think that's what this is.
Well, the last line in the article is the best part, right, Georgia? This is what evolutionary biologists predicted. It's really exciting that we have found what we found lines up so neatly with their predictions.
But again, they make the predictions and then they find stuff like this and they make it fit what look, that's, it's all storytelling.
Yeah, we expected our ancestor would be a little worm the size of a grain of rice 550 million years ago. Yeah. By the way, before we finish, one comment here, just to emphasize something. The person said, but should not the church obey the law for the time being? It is temporary. But that's not the point of what we're commenting on.
That's not the point of what
I
we're
mean,
saying.
we obey the law here. We closed the Ark and the Creation Museum to the public, as much as that hurt us, right? But what we're saying is, when a mayor comes out and says, I'll close churches permanently,
that's different.
That is a warning of what could happen and taking away rights and undermining freedoms.
And the Bible talks about us obeying government authorities. We are to do that. And so that's why we're doing...
Provided it doesn't contradict
Right. As long as it doesn't
word.
contradict God's word. And then it becomes closing a church permanently would. So that's where it goes too far. So, yeah. So.
All right.
All right. Well, that's all we have today. So we'll see you back next Monday.